2023 was one hell of a year. After years of trying and subsequently failing to be what others expected me to be, I finally figured out who I really was, and thanks to my incredibly supportive friends, I'm now able to live as my true self, which also explains the scuffed voice, but well, I started streaming consistently for the first time and made some very fun memories, like getting way too attached to my drones in Bioshock 2 and treating them as if they were my own children. Hearing Ashley scream, "Leon!" for the billionth time, driving my chat insane by reading their messages in the middle of a boss fight, and by refusing to use any consumables in Sekiro, permanently damaging my vocal cords by voicing every single character in the Sonic Murder Mystery, and getting traumatized by Amnesia the Bunker. But only after watching the video How I Finished My Gaming Backlog by Daryl Talks Games did I actually think about all of the games I've played throughout the year, and after checking my channel I realized that I'd played over 30 games, and then I came to the realization that I don't even remember all of them. I don't want this channel to be me playing games just to forget about them again, and in his video Daryl makes the point that by writing down your experience you remember it more easily, something I already knew but I never really connected it to gaming. So in the hopes that I won't steal too much from the original video that inspired this one, it's linked in the description by the way, I decided to go through all of the games I've played on stream throughout 2023. In this video I will rank every single one of them, but not by how good they are in general, but by my own experience playing them. So if I give a game you love a worse rank than you think it deserves, then simply blame it on me being too stupid for it. I started off the year by finishing what was left of Ghost Runner. Everything in this game is built around speed, and I love speed. I'm a Lucio main after all. That being said, I'm really bad at it, but I still had an absolute blast. Speeding through the levels while an absolute bang of a soundtrack is playing is more than enough to make you forget about the absolutely mediocre story. But some games are good because of the gameplay alone, and Ghost Runner is one of them, A tier. Next up was Titanfall 2, the game everyone loves. Apart from EA, that is. I don't think I can say anything about this game that hasn't already been said 1,000 times. The weapons are satisfying, wall running feels really good, the interactions with BT are fun, and the story is above average, which is about as good as FPS games get, and Effect & Cause is one of the best missions ever made. A tier for the game, but F tier for EA. The third and last movement-based game, at least for now, was Turbo Overkill. The game where you have a chainsaw for a leg and shoot stuff. Incredible explanation, I know. The music is good, the gameplay is fast and fluid, and the weapons are really satisfying. It's a good game, but sadly I didn't really enjoy streaming it for some reason. C tier. It has the overwhelmingly positive rating on Steam, so please don't let this stop you from playing it. I will probably play it again at some point, just not on stream. I blame this one on my lack of experience as a streamer and not on the game. After playing 3 very fast games, I started playing the Bioshock trilogy. I rate them all in one go because they all just kind of blur together in my non-existent brain. These games are obviously very good, and their stories can be a bit confusing at times, but not too confusing so you don't lose interest. The plasmids are a lot of fun to mess around with, and building my own drone army or making Big Daddies fight for me is something I won't forget anytime soon. But neither is the pipe minigame. I hate it so much, and I'm glad they only used it in the first game because it's just awful. A tier. Next up is the best co-op game out there, Deep Rock Galactic. It has dwarves, it has beer, it has an almost unlimited amount of war crimes. What more could you possibly want? A clear S tier. You can also mod this game and turn it into an incredibly cursed experience, and I obviously recommend doing that. After eradicating some Australian wildlife, I finally played the predecessor to Resident Evil Village, my favorite Resident Evil game. Resident Evil 7 is a weird game. The story is kind of forgettable, the gameplay feels a bit sluggish, the puzzles are weird as hell, the way you unlock doors makes zero sense, and the weapons feel very weak. Overall it's your standard Resident Evil experience, but I enjoyed it, and it didn't have too much horror, so I was able to play it without almost dying from a heart attack. B tier. Resident Evil 4 was next. It's probably most people's favorite Resident Evil game, and I can definitely understand why. The gameplay is fun as hell, and it's the game that actually got me into replaying these games to get a better score to unlock something new. I even see the appeal of doing speedruns, and I tried to beat the game as fast as I possibly could on one run, and it was fun, apart from a few sections at least. Once again, the story makes zero sense, but Ashley is cute, so I'll let it slide. I just wish I didn't have to hear her scream every other second. A tier should probably be S tier. Sekiro was my first FromSoft game of the year, and I can't really say a lot about these games anymore because Dark Souls brain rot has completely taken over my brain, or at least what's left of it. It's a good game and you should play it if you haven't done so yet, and even if you have, just play it again. I do prefer the combat of Dark Souls over Sekiro though, so it's only A tier. I completely forgot that I'd played Resident Evil 3, and that's probably enough to justify its ranking, but after managing to remember some of it again, it was okay, and I think I enjoyed revisiting the police station from Resident Evil 2. C tier for making me replay a better Resident Evil game. I'm sorry, that's all I can give it. My first reaction to the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog was a general noise of confusion. It's a fun little murder mystery that doesn't overstay its welcome, and flexing my non-existent voice acting talent was fun too. B tier for not actually killing Sonic though. This one might lead to a bit of criticism, but I never really got why people like Dead Space. I played the first game and gave up after an hour or so, LEMMiNO, but after playing the remake, I can safely say it's actually pretty good, especially compared to the train wreck Callisto Protocol turned out to be. In B tier, it's not my kind of game, but I finally get why people like it so much. We're back to movement games. Dishonored 1 and 2 were still as fun as I remembered them to be, and the art style hasn't aged at all, to be honest. Both games offer levels that are so fun to explore, and if it hadn't been my 5th playthrough, I would have definitely taken a lot more time to really take these levels in and explore every last corner of them. The abilities are fun to use, and playing as Emily to slingshot guards into the air was a nice addition in the second game. Combat in general is very satisfying, which is why I went for high chaos in both games. Yes, that did lead to the bad ending, but honestly I don't really care that much. The overall story is nothing to write home about, and having to sacrifice the fun adrenaline rush that is high chaos and instead going in stealthily just isn't worth it in my opinion, especially because stealth and non-lethal remove over half your options. A tier. I have only one thing to say about Grounded. I have arachnophobia, and while I know there's an option for people like me, it kind of defeats the purpose of the game in my opinion. So my job on stream was base building while Okami explored the world and died a lot. Overall, sadly just a D tier. Demon's Souls. The game that started it all. If we ignore all the other games FromSoft made before that at least. I never played the original, so after some careful consideration I made the financially irresponsible decision to buy PS5 to play the remaster. And what can I say? It's just what I expected it to be. The world is fun to explore, the bosses are just amazing, and the sound design alone made my purchase worth it. I just wish I didn't have to farm for healing items because I already hated it in Bloodborne. A tier, the minecarts explode. The next entry isn't a game in itself, but I felt it's still worth including. The Convergence mod for Dark Souls 3 almost turns it into an entirely new game. They added so much stuff and so many new features that it almost made me relive the experience of playing the game for the first time. Only downside is that it's still very limited by Dark Souls 3's linear level design, and I simply prefer that of Dark Souls 1. A tier because I always have something to complain about. I can't believe it took me 10 years to play The Last of Us, but I'm so happy that I finally did. Its opening is one of, if not the best video game opening I've ever played, and the story in general is beautiful and really makes you care about Joel and Ellie. The world looks so good, and exploring it for the resources doesn't feel like the chore it actually is. The only part I can criticize is that the gameplay can get somewhat repetitive since it's limited to sneaking or hiding behind cover and popping out to take 1 or 2 shots. A tier. Also, why on earth are they remastering the second part already? It just came out. Just give us 60 FPS Bloodborne, please. Overwatch 2, Blizzard's absolute disaster of a game. Calling it a massive disappointment would be an absolute understatement. Cancelling the PvE only to bring back a completely dumbed down version of it that might be fun to play but is also not what they had promised at all was the worst thing they could have done. Adding the insanely greedy monetization, the awful balancing, the awful community and a recent existence to that makes it a clear F tier. But I've developed Stockholm Syndrome, so I will continue playing it. Also, please make Lucio's boop a viable ability. I'm so tired of people just slowly floating back to the place I booped them away from. It's so insanely frustrating. Okay, I'm definitely not insane enough to create something like this. Just watch Max's video if we want to see what kind of brain damage this game can induce. I enjoyed my dates with Gabriel, S tier. I dropped Amnesia the Bunker after a single stream, and it's not because it's bad, it's the opposite actually. The entire game is set, as the name suggests, in a bunker, and you have to run around and fight items to progress and also fuel to keep the lights on. Without any fuel, your only option is an absolutely awful flashlight that you have to charge every few seconds. But charging it makes a lot of noise, so you have to be careful when you do it. This choice and the incredibly well done sound design made every second of streaming it an absolute nightmare. I couldn't possibly get through it no matter how hard I tried, so I had to drop it. F tier, it's way too scary for me. Baldur's Gate 3, what a game. I could make an entire video about this game alone, so this segment is going to be a little bit longer. Baldur's Gate 3 is Larian's latest game. Yes, it does look a bit like Divinity, maybe more than a bit. It does play like it too, but it's somehow even better. Something I didn't even think was possible. It starts with you getting eye surgery you never gave your consent for from an unlicensed doctor on a spaceship. The ship is then attacked by dragons, so you do the obvious thing of going to hell, where you are attacked by demons. Look, I don't know anything about the universe the game is set in either, so just go with it. You manage to get out of hell by touching tentacles, and crash the ship in Faerun, and from this point on, the world is your oyster. Seriously, you can do whatever you want. You can help the tieflings escape by killing some goblins.
Another dirt elf come to boss us around, eh? I could break your face.
or side with the goblins and commit genocide. If this game had the equivalent of the Geneva Conventions, I'm sure I've broken all of them by now. Or you can just leave. This game gives you so many options to choose from, and it probably makes it the most replayable game I've ever played, which also explains why only 17% of the player base have actually beaten the game. Everyone else is still in Act 1 but on their 17th character. How you approach anything in this game is completely up to you. Do you want to be a good character who helps those in need? Do you want to be as evil as possible and kill anyone who stands in your way? Or do you want to play co-op as a duo of bards with one murderous psychopath and one kleptomaniac who's very bad at stealing and constantly gets caught, thus leading to more murder? And yes, these boxes are filled with dead children. Or do you want to just play the game as yourself and get rejected by every single character? The choices are truly endless. Speaking of characters, there's such a diverse cast of characters that there's no more casual racism and favoring. Instead, they're all doing it on a competitive level. Jokes aside, the characters are insanely well written. To avoid any further spoilers, I will just say this. I want to hug every single one of them because Larian's main device for character development is tragedy. And it works, but they all deserve so much better. I loved learning more about their personalities, their lives, and their hardships, as depressing as it was. And while the facial animations sometimes didn't convey emotions that well, the phenomenal voice acting completely rectified this minor problem. The narrator isn't really a character herself, but her voice is insane and fills me with immense jealousy, so I thought she's worth mentioning as well. If anyone's wondering, my favourite characters are Karlach and Minthara. One big teddy bear and one genocidal maniac, but I can fix her, or maybe I'll die trying, but even that would be worth it. Now, is Baldur's Gate perfect? Well, Minthara's romance is either bugged or lackluster. The camera can get a bit funky every now and again. Sometimes dialogue just doesn't work. Some quests are bugged. So the very obvious answer is yes, and if you disagree with that, you are simply wrong. So if you haven't played the game yet, do it now. Devil May Cry 5 is yet another game I probably wouldn't have played if it wasn't for this channel. The gameplay is incredibly fun, the music is way better than it has any right to be, and the story is insane. Not insanely good, just insane. But even after 3 playthroughs, I still have no idea what I'm doing, and if I manage to hit a combo, it's always entirely on accident. This game is just way too much for my single brain cell. A tier. Another game that was way too much for my brain was Inscription, the very normal card game where you play as Luke Carter. By sheer coincidence, he finds what is apparently the only copy of the game Inscription, and when he starts playing it, the confusion this game caused had so many layers, and just when I thought I finally understood something, the game hit me with even more confusion. My only problem was the gameplay, because I'm usually not that big of a fan of card games, but the story was engaging enough for me to keep playing to the very end. A tier. Even though it was released 5 years ago, Subnautica is somehow one of the most beautiful games I've ever played. The vibrant colors of the ocean make it so much fun to explore, until you see a certain outline in the distance. From that point on, it turns into one of the best non-horror horror games out there. But as I've already said, I don't like horror games. And sometimes it also felt like I was aimlessly swimming around in the ocean. In the end, I basically had to force myself to play it again, and while it was fun once I got back into it, I decided to take a break from it after a combined 27 hours of streaming. B tier. It is a really good game, just not for me. Lies of P surprisingly not a Dark Souls game, but only a Souls-like. That being said, it is just like Dark Souls, but with a few twists. But unlike some other Souls clones, it is actually good. The world's interconnectivity makes it engaging to explore. The weapon upgrade system is fun to mess around with. I did stop after finding a boss weapon I really liked though. The music is really good, and so are most of the bosses. Admittedly, there were some fights that I didn't really like that much, but overall it's a game I'd recommend playing if you like Dark Souls. There is however one problem. The volume of the enemy screams is for some reason down to the same slide as the dialogue, so when I turned up the dialogue enough for it to actually be audible and then went into the boss fight with a spaghetti monster, I almost went deaf. This isn't really that much of a problem for me because I didn't care about the story in the first place. Well, apart from the moment I accidentally killed Eugene's brother and then read his letter to her. That part made me feel like an absolute monster. Anyway, you can pet the cat, so it's an obvious A tier. The Automata lures you in with a hot android in a maid dress, or twink, if that's more your cup of tea, and then sneaks up on you and hits you with a bat that is the physical manifestation of the depression this game will undoubtedly cause. It was released in 2017, but it still looks good because it doesn't really try to look that realistic. But for most people, the main reason for playing it is the story. It's a story about finding humanity in places it shouldn't be. It isn't bound to humans, as it can exist in a world filled with seemingly emotionless machines. But humanity isn't always good, nor is it bad. It's brutal yet innocent. It's love, sadness, hate, fear. It's flawed perfection. Alright, that's about as much pretentious writing as I can force myself to do. The story is really good, and it somehow forced the most difficult decision on me I've ever had to make in a game, and I absolutely did not expect that to happen. But I do want to stick to the theme of flawed perfection, as pretentious as that term is. This game's combat system could be perfect, yet there are just enough problems with it that it isn't. The difficulty is incredibly weird. Normal is just way too easy, and hard just led to me getting one-shot by regular enemies, even with HP and defense chips. If the robots aren't using you as a chew toy, the combat is really fun. There are a lot of different weapons with different combos and skills, but it's just easy enough to understand to not run into the same problem I had with Devil May Cry 5. But just when you're having the time of your life slicing through robots in slow motion, the game forces you to play 9S. Now, you may like 9S and the hacking that makes up 90% of its gameplay, but I don't. I want to enjoy the combat system, not the same shitty minigame 500 times. You could technically argue I could simply avoid hacking, but you kinda can't. In some areas you're forced to hack stuff for progress, and 9S isn't the best combat android, which led to me hacking stuff for 30 minutes, getting one shot by the boss, and then having to redo all of that. This leads me to my last point of criticism. The save system. This game does not have an autosave or checkpoints. Why? I started my playthrough on hard and got killed by the tutorial boss, so I had to redo the tutorial, only to immediately get killed again. And the best part, the cutscenes are unskippable. Eventually I just restarted my playthrough on normal and readjusted the difficulty once I was actually able to save the game. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that you can only save the game in specific areas or at dedicated save points. This was actually the reason I stopped playing the game some years ago, because the game crashed and I had to redo like 2 hours of content and I just couldn't be bothered. Now it may sound like I hate this game, but I don't. I've simply spent enough time with it to see its flaws, but I still love it. The story and the combat system are good enough to mostly ignore all the other problems, and you can simply avoid getting one shot by not being as stubborn as me and playing the game on an appropriate difficulty. And not many games actually make me think about the choices they present me with, so the writers did an absolutely phenomenal job. A tier, it should be S tier, but ignoring all the flaws would be unfair to the other games. Super Liminal made my brain hurt, and also my eyes in some sections, because this game is just way too bright sometimes. I'm not very good at puzzle games, and this one was no different. I don't think I've ever played a game that messed as much with my brain as this one did by playing with perspective. It's a very surreal experience that doesn't overstay its welcome, as it can be completed in about 3 hours. But in these 3 hours, I didn't know what on earth I was doing even once. Dr. Glenn Pierce's wonderful insights, my brain absolutely melting, and the game questioning my chaotic energy are things I won't forget anytime soon. A tier. The last game I played was Until Dawn, and what can I say? Calling this piece of garbage a bad game would simply be an insult to every other game out there. The story is an absolute snooze fest, but we aren't here for the story, we're here to watch all these people die in horrible ways. Seeing these characters die is the point of the game, so the game made sure you'd hate them enough for their deaths to be satisfying by making the worst human beings on earth, and at least they succeeded in this. I hate every single one of them, so my goal wasn't to get them out alive. Gameplay is almost non-existent, being limited to slowly walking and the occasional button press, but the quote-unquote game proudly claims that your actions will have consequences. Ooh, how scary! Problem is, they usually don't. You can put down the controller in most situations and miss all the QTEs, and it wouldn't make a single difference. In some situations, the game even takes that away from you by forcing you to take a single action without giving you a time limit. Truly riveting gameplay. The only part I even remotely enjoyed was the therapist calling you out for being the murderer all along. A nice twist, and I apologize for spoiling it, but no one cares anyway. F tier.
Who are you? An older type of augmented human, 4th generation. Have we made contact? I am Air, a Rubiconian. Please, you must wake up. Before your consciousness is forever scattered in the coral flow. Raven, you're finally awake. The coral has carried us, disseminated us across the stars. Now, we're everywhere. Anywhere. Raven, let's meet this new age together. Main system, activating combat mode.
Armored Core 6 is one of, if not the most fun game I've ever played, and I can't even tell you why exactly that is. It's definitely my favourite game of the year, but that doesn't mean it's objectively the best game. Baldur's Gate is arguably the better game, and it deserved winning Game of the Year, but it can't possibly win against Armored Core if I'm the one deciding the winner. No matter how good the story of Baldur's Gate is, and no matter how much I've fallen in love with its world and its characters, getting my cheeks clapped by the same boss for 3 hours straight will just always win. This is the kind of brain damage Dark Souls can cause, and it's important to seek help. Text brain rot to some random number if you or a loved one is suffering from this affliction. It's never too late to get help, and you can overcome this. I have never played an Armored Core game before, so my first experience with the series was this game giving me a gun and a sword, putting me into an unfamiliar environment and saying, go fight that helicopter over there. And it's one hell of a tutorial boss. In typical FromSoft fashion, the game does not hold your hand at all, and this time they went even further and replaced the relatively easy to understand stats from Dark Souls with an Excel spreadsheet. Even after 4 playthroughs, I still don't know what any of this means because I'm a chaotic gremlin and this entire time I simply focused on what gave me the most speed. I even have an entire build that just speed paired with a butter knife, appropriately named Knife Gremlin. Messing around, creating and testing new builds is almost an entire game in itself. You can build ACs that stay in the air for what feels like entire missions, ACs that are way too fast and can avoid attacks without actually having to dodge them, ACs with 2 Zimmermans, which is the equivalent of using Commodore Zor on every boss in Elden Ring. You can also bring a missile boat into the Balteus fight and fill the entire screen with missiles, or you just equip every part with the most AP, slap 4 miniguns on it and face tank the boss while holding down the trigger and watching the health bar disappear. Replaying all the missions to get S rank in them led to me wanting to get all the achievements for this game, and I never really do that. I've played this game way too much by now, and even when I just wanted to get some footage for this video, I just ended up replaying it again. I can't really say much about the story even after said playthroughs because Vati's lore video isn't out yet and my brain simply turned off during all of the story expositions. But let's be honest, the story isn't why anyone plays FromSoft games. Don't get me wrong, they're usually pretty good, but hiding them in item descriptions or behind obscure dialogue makes them hard to understand. The only part of the story I cared about and the only part you really need to know is that no one likes Iguana. The real reason for playing their games is the gameplay, and FromSoft absolutely delivered once again. The combat system is relatively easy to understand, and once you finally overcome the tutorial boss, clear a few missions and kill a few enemies along the way, you become more and more confident. You arrive at the watch point, kill what you think is the boss, and then you are hit with a reality check. Balteus just looks at how confident you've got, laughs, and then proceeds to kill you mercilessly. It took me ages to beat him. Admittedly, it might have been because I'm too stubborn to give up, change my build and come back, but we'll just ignore that. He's not that far into the game, but only a little over 70% of the players have actually beaten him, even fewer on console. Almost all of the bosses are an absolute blast to fight, and their fights are incredibly cinematic. There are obviously a few exceptions because every FromSoft game needs at least one shitty gimmick boss, but it's easy to forget about them and focus on the better ones. Even the Ice Worm, which is essentially a gimmick boss, isn't a bad fight. It might entirely revolve around hitting it with a stun needle to lower its shield, so that Rusty can take out the other shield, but every shot just looks too good to get mad at this fight. It's also a fight that isn't made redundant by dual-wielding Zimmermans, something I should have definitely done less in my first playthrough. My only quote-unquote complaint is that I have way too much money and don't know what to do with it. But of course there won't be anything left to do after 4 playthroughs, so I don't really mind that much. Especially because FromSoft has just recently added a few new weapons to spend my money on. I do hope that they release a DLC one day with new missions, parts, etc. But considering how long we've been waiting for the Elden Ring DLC already, I don't think my chances are that good. All in all, it's a clear S tier and my favorite game of the year. But I get why Baldur's Gate is overall the better game, so please don't murder me for putting it below Armored Core. That's it. That's all 31 games rated, so here, after almost 30 minutes, is the entire tier list. In F tier we have Overwatch 2 for being an absolute disappointment, Until Dawn for just being awful, and Amnesia the Bunker for being way too scary. Nothing in E tier, so we'll skip straight to D tier. Here we just have Grounded, because there are too many spiders, an absolutely unexpected outcome. In C tier we have Resident Evil 2 because it's just an okay game, and Turbo Overkill because I sucked at streaming it. In B tier we have Resident Evil 7, The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, Dead Space and Subnautica. All of them are good games, but not for me for one reason or another. A tier is the biggest tier with Ghost Runner, Titanfall 2, Sekiro, Resident Evil 4, the Bioshock trilogy, Dishonored 1 and 2, Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 3 Convergence mod, The Last of Us, Devil May Cry 5, Inscription, Lies of P, Superliminal and Nier Automata. I made that sentence way too long. Finally in S tier we have Deep Rock Galactic, Ultra Kill, Baldur's Gate 3 and Armored Core 6, with AC6 being my game of the year. I thought about adding games to the list I've played off stream, like Spider-Man Miles Morales, Fire Emblem Engage or Starfield. But this video is already way too long and it'll be a miracle if a single person watches it until the very end. Originally, I wanted to release this video at the end of December, but because my brain never works when I need it to, I ended up playing too much Elden Ring instead. The Armored Core part also took a lot longer than I would have liked it to, because I essentially had no idea what I was doing, but I wanted to finish it. I know that I'm still not very good at things like writing or editing, so thank you very much for watching this mess. I might do something like this again next year, and who knows, maybe I'll be better by then. Bye bye!